Welcome, my name is Dr. Eric Landrum from the Department of Psychology at Boise State University. This is a brief Jing video about how to run an independent means or independent samples t-test. I'm going to go ahead and click over to an SPSS file, and then I'm going to go ahead and run a t-test. And to do that, I'm going to go to Analyze. I'm going to come down to Compare Means, and I'm going to do what's called an independent samples t-test. Sometimes you'll hear this called by different instructors an independent means t-test. I'm going to click on that, and I get this dialog box. In this left frame, as we're accustomed to, you're going to have all the possible variables in your data set that you've got in front of you. But over here, this is interesting because now you've got to know what you're doing. So for example, the independent variable is actually going to be called the grouping variable in this little dialog box, and the dependent variable, or you could have more than one variables, is going to go here where it says test variable. So now what I decided to do is I'm going to run an analysis to see if males and females differ on their GPA in this data set that I have. And so I'm going to enter gender as my independent variable, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And your current cumulative GPA is going to be entered as my dependent variable up here where it says test variable. Now notice that I can't run the analysis yet. I can't. OK is kind of grayed out. It's not a live or active button. And so there's more I have to do here. I have to resolve these question marks. I have to tell SPSS what codes did I use to code gender for males and females. And so I didn't use words, but I used numerical codes when I entered my data up here in the data view. So I click on Define Groups, and I remember from entering the data that I coded females as zeros and males as ones. I'm going to click on Continue. What happens if you get that wrong and you misremember, you took a guess and you're not quite right? You're going to get an error message. It's no big deal. And that'll just tell you got to go back and redo something. All right, so I'm going to do an independent samples t-test here. I'm going to look at males versus females on their current cumulative GPA to see if there's a significant difference or not. I'm ready to go. I click on OK. I'm going to get that output file that we're used to seeing. And so here's a nice little recap of the statistics. There were 49 females in the sample. The mean was 3.11. The standard deviation was a 0.42 with rounding. And the males, average GPA was 3.03. There's only 22 males. And with rounding of 0.49, the standard deviation. Then the question becomes, there's a difference there, but is that a statistically significant difference, or could that happen by random chance alone? So there's a whole bunch of things for us to look at here. In fact, there's a whole bunch of things here. We only really care about 3 items down here. First off, forget about Levine's test for equality of variances. Just forget about that one. Secondly, when you look at the t-test stuff, there's 2 rows here. Always look at the top row when you're interpreting this SPSS printout. Always look at the top row. And so forget about the F and the SIG. We did a t-test. And so here's the lowercase t. Here's our actual t observed value. You're going to round that and report to 2 decimal places when you report it in your APA manuscript. Here's our degrees of freedom. And finally, here's our significance level. And like all our other inferential statistics, we're only going to reject the null hypothesis when this number right here is less than 0.05. It's a 0.471, which means that this difference with this many people could happen by random chance alone 47% of the time. So we're going to end up accepting the null hypothesis. Now, is there a difference? Yes, there is. You can see that females have a higher GPA than males in this sample, but it's not significant. And so statistically speaking, these distributions are nearly identical. Okay, and so there's not a significant difference between males and females on their cumulative GPAs, and this difference could happen by random chance alone 47.1% of the time. So a couple things to recap here. You're going to look at the t observed here. This is going to be your t observed. You're going to report that to 2 decimal places. When you write your sentence in an APA formatted paper, you are going to need this number, 69 degrees of freedom. And you're going to need to have this significance level, and depending on the format you use, you might either use this exact p-value, or you might report that it's not significant. So that's it for me and how to do an independent samples t-test in SPSS.